empty the chamber on them. And how do you do that? We're 6 seconds, 0.8 feet, everything you got. Everything you got. Turn that shit up. Let's go. Welcome to the Scoop World Order, final week of Spring Ball edition. We have a lot of big news today. We've got a Buckeye in the transfer portal. We have a big Buckeye commitment from South Florida, the South Florida Express. We're going to talk about that. And, we're just kind of winding down spring ball. We had practice Monday, practice Wednesday. So kind of questionable what's going to go on with, the arrangements for Dwayne Haskins. I assume Ryan Day and his wife and probably Corey Dennis and his wife are probably going to head to those. And I don't know how that'll affect if they move practice around or whatnot. But it's going to be interesting. Spring game is on Saturday, but predominantly the hay is in the barn for spring ball, and a lot of spots have been clinched, it seems like, going into fall camp. So with that, this is a pretty big one. We got a great film breakdown, and we appreciate you guys. Again, we keep growing. We're blowing up. It's unbelievable what you guys are doing for us. We've got huge news coming commitment wise, in the very near future. So stay tuned in, leave us a like, comment on, with this one, who does Mark Fletcher remind you of as a running back? He looks a little bit like Eddie George. We talked, you're kind of upright. Who does he remind you of? What do you think of him? We're going to watch some film on him. Love your input. We always love your input. So with that, I'm going to bring in Nevadabuck. Nevada, how are you tonight?
Doing good. Lots going on. Like you said, big commitment for the Buckeyes, some transfer portal action, some looming commitments, some movement on the depth chart. So lots going on in the Ohio State world for sure.
Yeah, and since we've got a full plate, we're just going to get right into it. So emerging starters, I got personally some great intel today about shake up on the D line. Potentially, we could see the young bloods, playing over the old bloods, potentially playing more than the old bloods. I don't know how that'll hold true. I think it's going to be a game by game thing. But we've got two of the best sophomore defensive ends in the country pushing, Tyler Friday, who hasn't done anything all spring, Jean Baptiste, who's just kind of been a guy through his whole career, and Zach Harrison, who's been underwhelming. And we have, two young guys that are hungry, nipping at their heels in JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer. I think that they're both more comfortable. I think that they're both noticeably stronger, more confident. And I like for those guys to emerge potentially and take the reins and up the production from our defensive ends, because our defensive line was as disappointing of a position on the team as there was last year, based on the lack of production in the pass rush and just getting absolutely manhandled against Michigan. So, I'm excited to see what some of these young guys can do that didn't really play much down the stretch, even with Tyleek and Mike Hall. I think that these guys are exciting and they're fun to watch. That a couple, I know we were talking about this, some of the names you've heard as emerging starters. Who do you have?
Well, I've got guys like, Jacqueline Johnson, Jordan Hancock. I mean, the thing that's becoming abundantly clear after watching Knowles kind of do his thing here for a few weeks through the spring, and, as he's come into the Ohio State organization, is he's not standing on seniority at all. I mean, he is going to absolutely shake things up. And upperclassmen that may have come in thinking that they had some sort of leg up on the younger guys are in for a rude awakening, because Knowles is not about that. Knowles is going to play whoever can help him right now, with no regard to seniority. And I think you're going to see more young guys playing the defense this year as a result than we've ever had, maybe in Ohio State history. That's how dramatic a change it's already been this spring, and I think it's going to be that pronounced this fall as well.
Yeah, and I think that when you have wholesale changes on defense, it really helps for guys like CJ Hicks, Gabe Powers, guys that come in early. They're learning the defense at the same time that the veterans are. So, it's all about who wants to commit, who wants to really get it down pat to the point where you're just reacting and you're not thinking about what your assignments are anymore. And I think that's, it benefits some of these younger linebackers, some of these younger players. Obviously, Tanner McAllister is a complete alpha in the back end, having been in the defense, having been one of Knowles' favorite players. So him showing up, obviously that was not great news for Bryson Shaw, a kid that played a lot for us last year. He already hit the portal. legend Cavazza has already hit the portal. And we're still over the scholarship limit. So there's going to be more guys hitting the portal. Like, I mean, this roster is far from set. And, after last season, we had guys hitting the portal during camp last year. So, this thing it's a whole different world now with the portal. And, it's going to be exciting to see what goes on. Any thoughts on offense, Nevada, in terms of some of the emerging guys?
Well, I just think offensively, you've got wide receiver spots that are open right now, and the names that I keep hearing are guys like Jaden Ballard. Obviously, everybody knows about Jackson Smith-Jigba. Everybody knows about Marvin Harrison. Everybody knows about Emeka. But I think Jaden's a guy that, I mean, as good as those other guys are, he may end up being I'm not saying he's going to be better than all of them, but he's going to be as good as anybody that's been there in a while. I mean, he's really, really good. He's really, really turning heads. He's hit, a little bit of a slump here as of late, but I think he's starting to come out of it. And I'm expecting big things out of him. I think the other positions on the line, you've got Cade Stover at tight end. The running back position is pretty established. It's clearly Stroud at quarterback. The offensive line 7 or 8 deep, but the wide receiver room, you've got to watch that for transfer portal action. You've got to watch that for guys emerging. But a lot of talent in that room. But sometimes too much talent can be as much of a problem as too little talent.
Yeah, and I think that there's guys at the skill positions that definitely, I'm not going to name names, but they're on portal watch. In my mind, they're on portal watch. I don't want to put anybody on blast, but there's some guys on offense that if they transferred tomorrow, I wouldn't be shocked at all, just because of where they're at on the depth chart. The way the reps are shaking out in practice so far in the spring, like guys can kind of read the tea leaves as to where they're at, especially as they're getting a little older. They're second, third year guys and they're not getting the reps that they think they deserve, and they can go elsewhere and start playing. So it won't surprise me at all. So going to move on to the wonderful and amazing South Florida Express. And they did an absolutely phenomenal job. These kids are crazy. They wore Power Rangers outfits at a tournament. And it was notable that Carnell Tate wore red, which is kind of like scarlet, and Brandon Innes wore white, which is kind of like gray, for the scarlet and gray. Tell me a little bit about your past with the South Florida Express, Nevada. You've known their owner, Brett Getz, for a long time, but tell me a little bit about your past with these guys and how you've known them and how you've seen them develop into this premier organization in South Florida.
Yeah, well, I can remember when Brett first got into this and first started it, and had reached out about players potentially coming up and visiting with Ohio State, and people had questioned what's Brett's motivation for doing this, and because a lot of that 7-on-7 action right now is run by guys that are, I won't say they're unscrupulous, but they're it's a little shady. It's like AAU basketball, and
Oh,
Brett's a great guy doing it for all the right reasons, and has turned that thing into a powerhouse. Like when I first started watching him, he'd had a couple of kids, and then next time I brought my son down to watch him, we see Teddy Bridgewater out there throwing the ball around, and we're like, boy, that guy's got a live arm. He's like, yeah, he's pretty good, and now the team's just loaded with Division I talent and stars up and down the line. So Brett's done a magnificent job with SFE, and it's really a tribute to him that the organization just keeps growing and keeps doing so well, because that's not easy. He's always scrambling to get kids here and get kids there, and keep it on the straight and narrow. And Brett does a fabulous job of doing that.
yeah, and I think when you have kids that are from all over the city, really all over the state. I mean, because Tate, he's at IMG, which is up north, and that's not close to Miami or Pompano Beach or where a lot of these guys are from. Like getting all these guys to all these tournaments, and they're not just in Florida. I mean, they're in Georgia, Las Vegas, California, and it's like you got to organize the flights, you got to book the hotels, you got to get the meals. Like, I mean, it is a humongous commitment to put on the kind of the traveling show that these guys put on. I met them last year at Ohio State's football camp. It was funny at the time when I was talking to recruiting experts, and they said that Brandon Innes had no shot of coming into Ohio State, and now Ohio State looks like they're favored to get Brandon Innes, because Lincoln Riley took off, and he'd been in Oklahoma or Georgia lean, and now, it's just with recruiting, like you just never know, especially when they're going into their junior year. There's a lot of things that can change everything. But they're really nice kids. And it was interesting because I don't know what kind of relationship they had with Carnell Tate at the time, but it didn't seem like much. Like it didn't seem like I don't even know if they probably knew of him just because he's at IMG and he's, a heralded 4-star type kid, but he wasn't a part of the South Florida Express crew. And now, I think that they kind of got to know him. They saw how good he was at Ohio State's camp, and they just kind of gobbled him up and added him to the conglomerate of talent, which is it's kind of funny. Like when these guys are kind of going around to these camps with their South Florida Express gear on and their South Florida, and they probably see some guys that stand out that are from Florida or they're from somewhere in the South, and they say, hey, why don't you come play 7-on-7 with us? Because a guy that won't surprise him at all if he's playing quarterback for him in maybe a tournament or two is Dylan Raiola, who they got to know really well last weekend when they were all in town and they were all, kicking it, hanging out, and they saw how talented he was. They saw how much Ryan Day wants him. And I'm talking about Dylan, and they're just like, why don't you come play quarterback for us for a tournament or two? And that's kind of how it's just interesting how these things work out. But yeah, the 7-on-7 scene is pretty wild. I mean, I'm sure you've seen some things, haven't you, Nevada?
No doubt. I mean, 7-on-7. For anybody who hasn't seen seven, people in Ohio don't really get exposed to 7-on-7 that much, but it's fun. I mean, the tournaments are fun. It's fun. There's lots of trash talking. There's lots of stuff going on out there, and if you get a chance to go check one out in your area, go do it because it's big time entertainment during the off season, and you can see some great players out there.
Yeah, and we're going to move on to a member of the South Florida Express who committed, Mark Fletcher, running back from Heritage, the same school as Brandon Ennis, committed today. He, good-looking kid, tall, angular kid. He reminded me of a couple guys. Who did he remind you of, Nevada? We're going to watch this film in a second, but we watched a couple clips beforehand. Who did he remind you of initially when you saw him?
Well, just again, stylistically, he reminded me a little bit of Carlos Hyde. He's got a little bit of that Eddie George, Ezekiel Elliott kind of upright running style. Um, I don't think he's considered to be like a 1A type of back, but he's definitely a solid 1B type of back. He's probably more Mayan Williams than he is Trey Henderson. Um, but really, really, really good running back, really talented, great hands, big sturdy kid, and it's a prototypical, Big Ten type of running back who can bring the power, run it up in between the tackles, and do a little bit of everything for Ohio State. And so it's a nice get for Ohio State, and I know they're excited to have him.
Yeah, it's good to get a guy in the class. They want to take two. Um, Again, as I've stressed over and over again, with the transfer portal, I don't know how many of these guys stay for 2, 3, 4 years, but getting two, assuming we can pull off Richard Young, which would be a 5-star number one running back in the country. With him being the 1B, with Fletcher being the 1B, I think that would be fantastic. But it's just the name of the game now is you got to stockpile these kids because we potentially could lose a running back to the portal next month or next week. I mean, so if one of these guys has an opportunity to go start and play somewhere, it's a new reality. So you kind of always got to take one or two more than you really think you need because of how fluid rosters are now. And it's kind of sad that it's come to this and that they haven't regulated it yet and said, hey, kids, you got to sit here for 2 years if you want to transfer without penalty and I mean, I don't know I'm glad I'm not part of the regulatory committee in the NCAA, but there's got to be some sort of solution because it can't just be, hey, you can leave at any time, do whatever you want, no penalties, nothing. Because I think that there's just so many kids that make poor decisions that are impulsive, and it's going to cost a lot of kids good careers. I'm going to transition to the final days of spring, but Nevada, your thoughts on that, on the portal? We obviously we were talking in pre-show about we had a basketballer talk a little bit about we had Michi Johnson hit the portal today. Talk a little bit about the portal from your perspective.
Well, I think the portal, I think it's well intentioned. It's just like NIL. I think all these things are well intentioned and they're based in some sort of it's a good idea that when you unregulate it, it just people look to exploit it. It's kind of like medical red shirts were, or gray shirting back in the day, or all these things. It was it was designed to give kids freedom of movement and not lock them in and make them captive to their teams. But like you said, it's kind of chaos right now, and teams can't plan. You can't build depth. I look at it as we're heading into the final days of spring, and we're talking about things like offensive line depth. Well, the days of having 12 capable guys in the offensive line are over because you're just not going to be able to keep them. They're not going to stay. When you lose the Max Rays to Colorado or the Ryan Jacobys to Pittsburgh or other guys that are going to leave, you're going to be down to 7 or 8 guys on the offensive line. You're always going to be thin on depth at wide receiver or other spots where people aren't playing because kids aren't going to stay. They're not going to stay if they're not playing. And I think it's changed everything. As a fan, I think people have to fundamentally change the way that they look at these things because depth is going to be kind of transitory and it's going to be kind of an illusion, and you're only going to be as good as your next portal hit. And that's why Ohio State, switching to basketball, it's like they lose to Michi Johnson. They're mining the portal heavily right now, and I think Michi saw the writing on the wall, and he's out of here as a result. So I think it's gonna for fans, you're just gonna have to get used to the fact that kids are only going to be here for a brief moment in time. Enjoy them while they're here, and don't get too hung up on depth because depth is only going to be as good as the next transfer in or the next transfer out.
Yeah, I mean, and it really it's a thing that affects everybody because if you're at the top and you're like in Alabama, a Georgia, and Ohio State, and you've got 5-star offensive linemen that think they should be starting and they're backups, and I mean Georgia lost a kid that was a top 10 recruit in the entire country at all positions and hit the portal yesterday. 5-star kid, great looking kid, probably going to go to Florida State or Miami based on who gives them a better NIL deal. Bama lost multiple offensive linemen. The thing that you really look at are just the positions where you don't rotate. Because if you're a D lineman and you can get in the rotation and play 20, 30 plays a game, that's great. But like on the O line, you don't rotate until the game's over, until someone's out of the gig, until it's a blowout. Like, I mean, if you're the starting tackle, you're playing the whole game until the game is in doubt. And I think that is why quarterbacks and O linemen are really prone to hitting the portal. And I think next year when DeWand and potentially if PJ goes pro, which it's iffy at this point, but it could happen. I mean, we're going to be a really impressive destination for whoever that top freshman, sophomore tackle is that's in the portal and wants to go start somewhere immediately. And we haven't been able to do that the last couple of years because we had Thayer Munford and Nick Petit, and then this year we have Paris Johnson and DeWand. And like when the kid from Georgia looks at our depth chart, he's like, yeah, absolutely not. I'm going to go to Miami where I can start tomorrow, and there's not really any competition, and that's, LSU picked up a tackle from Florida International who was a freshman All-American, and he moved on. And I don't know. It's going to be interesting because there's kids that they're getting a little long in the tooth for a college football player, and they haven't made any impact yet. And those are the guys I'm always watching on when it comes to the portal. So last thing I'm in this segment I'm going to end with is Nevada. We've got the spring game coming. Give me a guy or two. Potentially, given the format, given how it's slanted towards youth and guys who aren't as established, guy or two that you're looking forward to see in the modified spring game that we'll have on Saturday.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing like a Caden Curry or a Michael Hall and see what they can do. Or I think guys like that are going to have a chance to go up against some guys on the offensive line that may not be as sharp, and I think those could be breakout opportunities for them. I've been calling things for Michael for quite some time right now, and I think those two young guys on the defensive line are going to really have big showings on Saturday, and I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, I think Caden Curry is a fantastic pick. He'd probably be the one guy if you said, give me a guy who's going to blow up on Saturday. I'd say Caden Curry. It's a game that's built for defensive linemen, built for defensive ends. I mean, Solomon Thomas had 7 sacks in a spring game before, and he didn't have 4 sacks his entire career. So it's made for DNs. A couple guys I'm excited to see CJ Hicks and Gabe Powers, just because you're going to be playing a lot of base defense. The guys are going to have to think as hard, and you get to see them run and be athletes in space, which will be great because I think that those are guys that they're going to need to play sooner than later. And when Sonny Styles gets here in the fall, like you have guys that are going to inject um, a significantly higher level of athleticism into the linebacker and the safety room than we had a year ago or so. And it'll be fascinating to see if any of these older guys on defense and some of these older guys on offense take off. Because there's some guys that have been passed and their roles are probably going to be pretty small, and they want to play, they want to make it to the NFL, they want to do that kind of thing. And with the portal, I mean, it's always going to be sitting there as an option. And there's a lot of these guys that are really good players that could play at 95 out of 130 schools. They'd start tomorrow, and I think there's going to be guys that are going to be considering that. So with that, we are going to move on to our film breakdown. So we're going to watch a little bit of our new running back. As you said, remind you a little bit of Eddie, reminded you a little bit of Carlos Hyde. Hopefully skinny Carlos Hyde, not fat Carlos Hyde. All right, so here's our boy Fletch, just like the Chevy Chase movie. Our boy Fletch here, getting the ball, open field. I mean, this is good ball too. This is good South Florida football. A lot of athleticism, a lot of speed. But yeah, just give me your thoughts from these first couple of plays. I'll show you my favorite play. It's coming up in a second.
Yeah, well, again, it reminds me of, if you go back and watch Zeke's, high school highlights, it was like the big kid playing against little kids, and this kind of looks like that as well. It's like, and you said, this is good competition, and he's a big guy. He runs by, gives him the leg, takes it away from him, and can has the speed to break away. So he's a lot of fun to watch.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and if you guys are noticing number one in the state, that's Brandon Innes, who's the number one receiver in the country. Looks like he's a Buckeye lean. I'd love to have the kid. He reminds me a lot of Jarvis Landry. Don't think he's a burner. He's got amazing hands, tough as nails, physical. Lot to like about Brandon Innes. So if we get this receiver running back combination, I think it would be fantastic for a recruiting class. And really, the South Florida Express kids, they're loving Ohio State at this point. They all want to play in a fun offense. They all want to get early burn, early playing time. And we've shown. I mean, you look at the Rose Bowl, Marvin Harrison Jr., 3 touchdowns as a true freshman. Jackson Smith and Jigba, 300 and whatever yards, 50 yards as a true sophomore. I mean, if you're good, you're playing. And Spencer Lanning, who's actually at Oregon now, had a great quote. He said, "When you're good enough, you're old enough." And I was like, that's actually a great quote, because he's got a really young coaching staff and he's a young head coach. And but like, if as a player, if you're good enough, then you're old enough. Period. So if you're a freshman and you're good enough, like Trey Henderson was last year, then guess what? You get to play and carry the mail. So, but yeah, I love the film. And with the two tailback stuff, it isn't always kind of what it seems sometimes. I remember, we brought in Brandon Sane and Boom Herron in the same class. Boom ended up redshirting, and Boom ended up having a better career than Brandon did, and Brandon played as a freshman, and he was probably more hyped than Boom was. But, Boom was a worker. And you've seen some of these classes where they take 2 tailbacks, and, talk a little bit about, why people shouldn't initially, assuming we get Richard Young, assume that he's going to be the guy. I mean, obviously he's a freak show. He's a stud, but talk a little bit about why you should pay attention to like a quote unquote 1B back like he is.
Well, I mean, again, we've talked about Mayan Williams. We've talked about, I mean, in a lot of ways, Antonio Pittman was kind of a 1B behind Beanie. The heralded National Player of the Year type of thing, and kind of got overshadowed a little bit. And Boom Herron, again, one of my favorites. And you just go back through the time, and you just see so many guys. You never really know who's going to be starting, because all these kids, the differences between these kids is so slight. And I think I always say I'm excited about every recruit, because I'm never sure who's going to be the superstar. And
No.
it's never more true than it is at the running back position, because these guys are so good and so talented. And like I said, to have kids off that South Florida Express team, that they're elite athletes, and that they can really play it at a super high level. So to get a kid like this that's a running back that can catch the ball that way, excited. And as a special little treat for anybody who was watching this to the end of the video, so I'll just give you a little hint that we're not quite done with the South Florida Express kids in terms of commitments, and it's probably a little bit more. It's a little bigger than you might even think. So I'll just leave it at that for now. I'll leave it with that little tease for it's like a little Easter egg for people that stayed to the end of the movie. Um,
Yeah.
there's some surprises coming down the pike on that, and Ohio State fans should be really excited about it.
Yeah, it's like we're watching the end of a Marvel movie, and you say through the credits, and you get the very end, and you're like, "Oh wow, that's amazing! This guy's going to be the villain in the next movie, or this is going to be the next big commitment, or commitments plural." Hint, hint. So, yeah, there's going to be some really excited Ohio State fans based on what you've told me with these South Florida Express kids, because I think that it's about to go huge for us with these guys, and it's going to be big. So, with that, we appreciate you guys as always tuning in. This is always a blast. We have so much fun talking ball. We appreciate your support. Again, who does our new running back remind you of? Is it Eddie George? Is it Jim Brown? Is it Beanie Wells? Is it Antonio Pittman? Leave a comment. Leave it. We love hearing your feedback. Please leave us a like. Subscribe to the channel. All of that really helps us spruce up the old YouTube algorithm and helps us win the quote unquote national championship of algorithms. And, we've been killing it lately. Thanks to you guys. We're getting recommended to tons of college football fans. Thanks to you guys. So it's all because of you. Thank you so much. We appreciate you, Scoop family. We appreciate you, Buckeye Nation. Thank you so much for tuning in. You guys have a great rest of your day.